For years, my parents mocked my career choice, calling me a dreamer, a failure, a joke at every family gathering. But last month, everything changed. In the middle of their biggest crisis, they turned to me for help, and I realized, for the first time, the power was mine. My name's Ayan, and I'm 32 years old. From the outside, I probably look like any other guy living in a mid-sized city apartment, but the story behind that door is complicated. Growing up, my parents had one script for success: become a doctor, lawyer, or engineer. Anything else was a hobby, not a career. I was the eldest child, the one they pinned all their hopes on. But instead of following the path they'd mapped out, I fell in love with technology and design. I taught myself to code, to build websites, to help small businesses find their voice online. It wasn't glamorous, and at first it barely paid for my bus fare, but it felt like mine. Every family dinner turned into an interrogation. "How long will you play with computers?" my father would say, half smiling, half disgusted. My mother would sigh and compare me to my cousin Adil, who'd just been accepted to medical school. "That's a real career," she'd whisper loudly enough for me to hear. Their words stung, but worse was the look of embarrassment in their eyes when relatives asked what I did. I still tried to be the good son. When my father's small shop needed a new logo, I designed it. When my mother wanted to sell homemade pickles online, I built her a website. I did all this quietly, for free, hoping one day they'd see my work as more than a pastime. Instead, they laughed at my long nights, my second-hand laptop, my empty wallet. At family weddings, I'd hear them introduce me as our creative one, still figuring things out. Those early years were hard. I worked from cafes with free Wi-Fi, juggled multiple freelance gigs, and lived off instant noodles. But something in me refused to quit. Bit by bit, the clients grew bigger, the projects more serious, and my skills sharper. By the time I turned 30, my small freelance hustle had become a registered company with a handful of employees and contracts overseas. I never bragged. Maybe part of me still wanted their approval, and part of me wanted to surprise them one day. I bought a modest apartment, drove a used car, and kept my success quiet. And then, on a rainy Tuesday morning last month, my phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice, usually brisk and sharp, was trembling. My father's health was failing, she said. The shop was in trouble. Bills were piling up. They didn't know who else to turn to. As she spoke, a rush of memories flooded back. The mocking laughter, the dismissive comments, the nights I spent wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. And now, after years of telling me I'd chosen the wrong path, they needed me. In that moment, I didn't answer her question. I simply said I'd come by after work. But inside, a storm was building. This is the story of how I walked back into that house. The house where I'd once felt so small, and realized the tables had turned. For the first time in my life, I would decide how the story ended. When I hung up the phone with my mother that day, I didn't go straight to their house. I sat at my desk for a long time, staring at my computer screen as emails piled up. Years of memories flickered through my mind like an old movie reel. The arguments at the dinner table, my father's voice saying, "This nonsense won't feed you," my mother turning her face away whenever relatives asked about my work. I'd always told myself that one day they would see, that my success would speak for itself. But in that moment, I felt more tired than triumphant. After all the humiliation, did I even want to be their savior? That evening, I pulled out an old folder from my drawer. Inside were letters from my parents, reminders of unpaid loans I'd once taken from them, printed screenshots of messages where they refused to help me when I was broke, and a few family photos I'd kept for reasons I couldn't explain. Looking at those papers, I realized how long I'd been carrying the weight of wanting to please them. The next day, I drove to their neighborhood, parking a block away from the house I'd grown up in. The shop my father owned sat on the corner, its paint faded, shutters half down even though it was midday. a sign of trouble. I walked past slowly, noticing the peeling posters, the empty shelves. This was the same shop I had once tried to modernize, with an online ordering system, a suggestion they had laughed off. Now it was practically empty. Inside the house, the smell of my mother's cooking hit me like a wave of childhood. She greeted me with a nervous smile, the kind you give a stranger you're asking a favor from. My father sat in his chair looking smaller, his hair grayer than I remembered. There was no mocking tone this time, only worry. We sat at the kitchen table. They spoke in low voices about bills, about hospital tests, about suppliers demanding payment. They mentioned my younger cousin Asim, the one they always praised, but apparently he couldn't help. They didn't know who else to turn to. I listened without interrupting, keeping my face neutral. Inside, my heart was racing. This was everything I had once dreamed of. Them acknowledging they needed me. But it didn't feel sweet. It felt heavy, complicated. I asked for details. How much money, what debts, what contracts. My father mumbled numbers that didn't add up. My mother changed the subject. That was my first clue that the situation was worse than they were admitting. Over. The next week I visited them twice more, each time leaving with scraps of information. At night, back in my apartment, I spread the papers across my dining table. Unpaid invoices, mortgage notices, hospital bills, old business records. I began, building a picture of what had happened. Years of ignoring change, poor decisions, overspending, and above all, pride. They had refused to ask for my help when it might have saved them, and now the crisis was complete. A part of me wanted to slam the folder shut and walk away. Another part, the boy who still wanted his parents' respect, couldn't. But I also knew I couldn't simply hand over money like a dutiful child. If I was going to step in, it had to be on terms that protected me and, honestly, protected them from themselves. One night around midnight, after hours of staring at the spreadsheets, I called a mentor of mine, Imran. He's a quiet man in his 50s who'd built and lost businesses and learned every lesson the hard way. I told him everything. There was a long silence on the line before he said, "Ayan, you don't owe them blind loyalty. If you help, do it with boundaries. Otherwise, you'll become their crutch forever." His words echoed in my head for days. Boundaries. Not revenge, not punishment. Boundaries. So I started gathering everything properly. I went to the courthouse and pulled public records on the shop's ownership. I requested copies of the mortgage documents. I even looked up the supplier contracts to see which were still valid. Piece by piece, the puzzle emerged. The shop building was still in my father's name, but heavily mortgaged. Some suppliers had already filed legal notices. My parents had taken small personal loans using the house as collateral. As I worked, I kept up appearances. At family gatherings, I smiled politely, never mentioning my late nights. At my office, my team thought I was handling a big client project. In reality, I was building a plan. Meanwhile, my parents kept calling, their voices softer each time. They hinted at the amount they needed. First a few thousand, then tens of thousands. I kept telling them I was looking at my finances. The truth was, I had the money. Years of saving and investing meant I could write the check tomorrow. But I wasn't going to do that. Not yet. I wanted to make sure that if I stepped in, it would be a turning point, not a bandage. I wanted them to see me not as the child they mocked, but as an adult with power, skill, and self-respect. Slowly, an idea formed. Instead of simply bailing them out, I could restructure the shop legally under my company's management, pay off the urgent bills, and install proper systems. It would protect my investment and give them a path to rebuild, but it would also mean they'd have to sign over partial control, a symbolic reversal of our old roles. The thought both thrilled and scared me. Could I really do this to my parents? Was it cruel, Or was it the only way to stop the cycle of disrespect? One evening, as I watched rain streak down my apartment window, I realized something. This wasn't about revenge. It was about self-respect. I could help them and still keep my dignity. And maybe, just maybe, that would teach them to respect me too. With that clarity, I made a list of everything I needed: updated financial statements, a formal agreement drafted by a lawyer, and a plan to present it all without losing my temper. This was no longer about the wounded boy at the dinner table. This was about the man I had become. The following Monday, I walked into the law offices of Naeem and Partners as if I were any other client. My palms were sweating under my blazer. I'd never thought I'd be the one hiring lawyers to deal with my parents. Mr. Naeem, an old friend of Imran's, greeted me with a handshake. In his 60s, with silver hair and a calm voice, he radiated the kind of discretion I needed. I slid the thick folder across the desk. "It's about my parents' shop," I said. For the next hour I spoke without interruption. He took notes, nodding occasionally. When I finished, he leaned back and said, "You're in a strong position, Ayan. You have liquidity, you have expertise. If you're willing to rescue the business, you can structure it to protect yourself legally." He explained options: forming a new company to manage the shop, drafting a management contract that gave me operational control, converting my cash infusion into a secured loan with collateral, or even buying a stake outright. Each option had different consequences for taxes, inheritance, and family dynamics. I listened, my mind racing. It wasn't the money that scared me. It was the confrontation. How would my parents react when they realized their failure son had become their last hope? Before I left, Mr. Naeem gave me a draft term sheet. "Don't show this to them yet," he said. "Collect everything first. Make sure there are no hidden liabilities. When you present it, keep it simple but firm. You're not punishing them. You're offering them a lifeline with conditions." That night, at my apartment, I spread the papers across my table again. Supplier contracts, mortgage statements, the draft agreement. The neat stacks of paper felt like chess pieces. For years, my parents had treated me like a pawn. Now, for the first time, I felt like a player. Still, the guilt came in waves. Memories of my father's hands guiding mine when I was a boy fixing a broken radio. My mother's laughter when she used to braid my sister's hair. Were those moments gone forever, or just buried under pride? To keep myself steady, I wrote 3 rules on a sticky note and stuck it to my laptop. No yelling, no rescuing without structure. Help, but stay free. The next week, I visited the shop again, this time as a quiet observer. I noted inventory, spoke casually with the lone employee, asked about supplier terms. My father thought I was just stopping by. He had no idea I was mapping the business in my head. At home, I acted normal. I asked my parents about their health, brought fruit, smiled. Inside, though, I was rehearsing the conversation that would come. In between these visits, I kept working my day job, attending meetings, launching a new product. My colleagues noticed I was more serious than usual, but assumed it was just stress. No one knew I was living a double life. Son by day, strategist by night. Meanwhile, the calls from my parents became more urgent. My mother's voice trembled as she hinted at creditors, at the possibility of losing the house. My father's pride cracked a little more each time. He even apologized once for not understanding my work. That apology pierced me deeper than any insult ever had. Slowly, my plan crystallized. I would form a new entity, Ayan Enterprises, to manage the shop. I would inject enough money to stabilize operations, pay off the most aggressive creditors, and modernize systems. In exchange, my parents would sign a management agreement giving me operational control for at least 3 years. During that time, I would train staff, implement online sales, and reposition the store. They would still receive a monthly stipend, but they would no longer make unilateral decisions. It sounded clean on paper, but I knew the human side would be messy. Pride dies hard, especially parental pride. One rainy evening I met Imran again at a quiet cafe. We sat in a corner booth, the smell of cardamom tea thick in the air. I showed him the draft plan. He studied it, then looked at me with a half-smile. "You've grown up, Ayan," he said. "Just remember, you can't control their reaction. You can only control how you present it." His words steadied me. Over the next few days, I assembled my evidence like a lawyer preparing for trial. I printed copies of bills, organized the debts into a chart, highlighted deadlines. I asked Mr. Naeem to prepare the formal management agreement and a secured loan document, both ready for signature. At night, I rehearsed what I would say. I even recorded myself on my phone, listening back to make sure my voice stayed calm. Sometimes, I felt like an actor about to step onto a stage. Through all this, I never told my sister. She had always been neutral in our family's tug-of-war, and I didn't want to drag her into it. Yet a small part of me wondered what she'd think of, me taking control. Would she see me as cold or as brave? The tension built like a drumbeat. My parents still had no idea that their son, once the failure, was about to walk in with a fully drafted plan that would change the power dynamic forever. The night before the scheduled meeting, I sat alone in my apartment. The city lights flickered through the window. On the table lay the folder, thicker now but neatly arranged. Next to it, my laptop screen glowed with a single sentence in a Word document. "This is not revenge. This is respect." I repeated it out loud like a mantra. Tomorrow, everything would shift. By the end of the week, everything was in place. Contracts printed, agreements signed by witnesses, a neat folder with labeled tabs, the kind of precision my parents had once mocked as corporate nonsense. Now that nonsense was about to keep their shop alive. I decided to hold the meeting at my apartment instead of their house. Neutral ground, fewer interruptions. I sent a polite but firm message. "Please come over Saturday evening. It's about the shop." My father replied with a terse, "Okay." My mother added a smiley face, trying to soften it. On Saturday afternoon, I tidied the living room like a stage set. Fresh teacups, a tray of snacks, the folder placed neatly in the center of the coffee table. Sunlight slanted through the blinds, cutting across the papers like stripes. I rehearsed my opening line again in my head. When the knock came, my stomach flipped. My father walked in first, stiff in his gray kurta. My mother followed, carrying a box of sweets as if it were still my birthday. We exchanged pleasantries, but the tension hummed just under the surface. I poured tea, handed out cups, and let a moment of silence settle before I began. "I've been looking closely at the shop situation," I said, keeping my tone even. "I know things are serious. I want to help, but we have to do it properly." My father shifted in his seat. "We don't need conditions from you," he said automatically, but his voice lacked the old iron. My mother looked down at her tea. I slid the folder across the table. "This is the plan," I said. "It stabilizes the shop, pays off the urgent debts, modernizes operations. It also protects me from personal loss. It's not a gift, it's a partnership. If you agree, we can sign tonight and start paying creditors Monday morning." For a heartbeat, no one moved. My father stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. My mother traced the rim of her teacup with her finger. The silence was louder than any argument we'd ever had. Inside me, the drumbeat that had been building for weeks reached its crescendo. All my sacrifices, all their insults, all the nights of planning had led to this living room battlefield. And yet, sitting there across from them, I felt strangely calm. I wasn't the angry teenager they remembered. I was a man with a plan, offering a lifeline with conditions, the only way forward. In that quiet room, with the contracts waiting on the table and their signatures just a pen stroke away, I realized something. This was no longer about proving myself. This was about setting boundaries, about respect, for them and for myself. The choice now rested with them, and in a few minutes, one way or another, everything would change. My father was the first to speak. He pushed the folder back toward me, eyes narrowing. "So, this is what you've been planning? You think you're some big shot now who can buy your parents?" I took a slow breath, careful not to rise to the bait. "No, Baba, this isn't about buying you. This is about saving the shop the right way. It's also about respecting my work. For years you told everyone I'd fail. You laughed at my company. And yet, here we are." My mother's voice trembled. "You know, we didn't mean to hurt you. We just didn't understand." "Exactly," I said softly. "You didn't understand, and that's fine. But now you do. This plan is legal, transparent, and fair. It keeps the shop afloat, pays your creditors, and makes me a partner. If you don't want it, you're free to refuse, but I can't keep sacrificing blindly." My father leaned back, crossing his arms. "And if we don't sign?" I met his eyes. "Then I'll step away. I won't let your debts drown me. I've built my own business, and I have employees depending on me. This isn't a threat. It's a boundary." The air in the room thickened. My father opened his mouth, closed it again. My mother reached for the papers, scanning them slowly. "This clause," she whispered, "this makes you a 50% owner." "Yes," I said. "It also means I take on 50% of the debt and responsibility. It's the only way banks will release the emergency funds." She looked up at my father. "We can't run the shop without him." My father's face softened for just a second, then hardened again. "Sign away our name, our shop, to our son?" "You're not signing it away," I replied gently. "You're sharing it with me, just like I've shared my income quietly for years. Remember when you needed money for the new refrigeration unit? Or the tax penalty last winter? Who paid for that? My company. You just didn't know." My father's hands shook on the armrest. "You paid that?" "Yes," I said, "and I never asked for thanks. But tonight is different. Tonight, we do things openly." My mother reached across and squeezed his hand. "He's right," she said quietly. "We've been proud in the wrong way." He exhaled slowly, staring at me like he was seeing me for the first time. The old defiance faded from his posture. "Bring me the pen," he muttered. I handed him a fountain pen, the same one he had given me when I graduated years ago. The symbolism wasn't lost on either of us. My mother signed first, a tear rolling down her cheek. My father signed next, his signature bold but shaky. When they slid the folder back to me, it felt like the air shifted. Not just a contract signed, but decades of power dynamics tilting, reshaping. I signed last, sealing the partnership. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then my father cleared his throat. "We should have believed in you." My chest tightened, but my voice stayed calm. "What matters is that we move forward with honesty. This isn't about revenge. This is about rebuilding." My mother wiped her eyes. "Thank you for still helping us after everything." I poured fresh tea, my hands steady now. "You're welcome, but things will be different. Transparent books, proper accounts. You'll still run the shop, but I'll oversee finances. We'll modernize inventory and marketing. If we work together, we can triple profits within a year." My father gave a small, reluctant smile. "Triple profits?" "Yes," I said, "because I know what I'm doing." We sat there sipping tea, an odd mixture of relief and unease hanging in the room. I realized my anger had cooled. What replaced it wasn't triumph, but a sense of clarity. They had mocked me, but I had stayed true to my work. And now, quietly, I had turned years of disrespect into a partnership on my terms. As they left my apartment that night, my father paused at the door. "You've become a man I'm proud of," he said gruffly, not quite looking at me. I gave a small nod. "Good night, Baba." When the door closed, I leaned against it, exhaling the tension I'd been holding for months. The contract lay on the table like a silent witness. I hadn't shouted, hadn't sought revenge. I'd simply used my skills, my patience, and my boundaries to turn the situation around. In that moment, I understood something deeper. Respect doesn't come from pleasing others. It comes from standing firm in who you are and what you've built. And though the journey ahead would be hard, I felt lighter than I had in years. My career was still mine. My parents were learning to see me anew, and for the first time in a long time, the future felt like a place I wanted to walk into. Not for their approval, but for my own peace. The morning after the signing, the city felt different. Or maybe I did. The sun broke over the skyline as I walked toward the family shop, now officially my shop too. My footsteps were lighter, but my mind buzzed with ideas, spreadsheets, and timelines. When I unlocked the old wooden door, the smell of flour and spice hit me the way it had when I was a child. Shelves stacked high with jars, faded labels, handwritten, price tags. This place had been my world once, a world I'd left behind to build my own. Now, it was a bridge between my past and my present. My parents arrived a few minutes later. My father was dressed in his usual apron, my mother carrying a small notebook. Their expressions were different, still cautious, but no longer dismissive. My father grunted a greeting. My mother smiled faintly. "We'll need to change a few things," I said, holding up a printed plan. "Inventory tracking, online orders, new suppliers. We'll also update branding. Customers today want a story, and we have one. 3 generations, authentic recipes, family tradition." My father stared at the plan, lips pressing together, then gave a reluctant nod. "Show me how." And so, for the first time in years, we worked side by side. I trained him on a point-of-sale system. He showed me where old accounts were hidden in battered ledgers. My mother began experimenting with packaging designs, doodling ideas on napkins. It was awkward at first, like strangers, learning to dance, but gradually the rhythm emerged. In the evenings, I still returned to my apartment, exhausted but oddly satisfied. My own company continued to grow, but I dedicated 2 days a week to the shop. Those days were no longer filled with resentment. Instead, they became a kind of therapy, proving to myself that boundaries and cooperation can coexist. Family gatherings changed too. At the next holiday dinner, my father introduced me not as the one who left the family business, but as our partner who saved us. He didn't say it warmly yet, but he said it publicly. And in our family, that was a revolution. Old wounds don't heal overnight. Sometimes I'd still catch my mother bragging to relatives about my company without acknowledging the years she'd mocked it. Sometimes my father's pride reared up, resisting my suggestions. But the difference now was choice. I no longer had to swallow my frustration or prove my worth. The contract and my success spoke for themselves. And then came the moment I didn't expect. 6 months later, profits had doubled. Customers were coming from neighboring towns because of our new online ordering system. My father stood behind the counter one evening as I closed out the register. He wiped his hands on a towel, looked at me, and said simply, "Thank you, son." 2 words, but they landed like a weight lifted off my shoulders. I nodded. "You're welcome, Baba." Driving home that night, I thought about how easily I could have chosen revenge. I could have let the shop go under, watched them struggle, or even bought it out at auction and left them penniless. Instead, I had chosen a different path. Boundaries, fairness, and a chance for redemption. Not because they deserved it, but because I did. In the quiet of my apartment, I poured myself a glass of water and stared at the city lights. My career was thriving. My parents were learning respect, and I had discovered something more valuable than money or revenge, my own power to choose how I respond. That choice became my compass. In business meetings, negotiations, even friendships, I began to ask myself, am I acting out of anger or out of clarity? Am I protecting my dignity or trying to punish? Life still threw challenges my way, but my approach had shifted. I no longer needed their approval. I no longer feared their disapproval. I had built something solid, and that solidity let me act from strength instead of desperation. One Sunday, while reorganizing old files, I came across a photo of myself as a boy standing in front of the shop with my father. He had his hand on my shoulder, both of us smiling. Looking at that photo now, I realized how full circle this journey had been. I placed the photo on my desk, not as a reminder of pain, but as a testament to growth. I wasn't that boy anymore, seeking validation. I was a man who had built his own path, and when the time came, extended a hand, but on his own terms. Sometimes I still wonder what would have happened if I had walked away that night instead of drafting the plan. Maybe the shop would have closed. Maybe my parents would have never learned. But deep down, I know why I didn't. Because my career, the one they mocked, had taught me something invaluable. True power isn't in payback. It's in creating. Creating boundaries, creating opportunities, creating a future that reflects your values. As the months rolled into a year, the shop became a case study in transformation. My parents began telling other shop owners how their tech-savvy son turned things around. I didn't correct them. Let them tell the story, however, they needed. The reality was enough for me. On the anniversary of our new partnership, we held a small celebration. My mother baked a cake. My father raised a toast. And I, quietly, felt a sense of peace. Not triumph, not vindication, just peace. Looking back, the moment they mocked my career was the moment they unknowingly gave me a gift. The push to stand on my own. And the night they came to me for help, they gave me a choice. I chose to be firm, but fair. I chose myself. And in doing so, I rewrote our story. Not as the son who needed their respect, but as the man who had earned his own.